Picture the scene. You've arrived at the water and picked the perfect swim. You've mixed up some top-tier, expensive ground bait and baited up your spot so thoroughly that every trophy fish in the lake should be queuing up. But 1 hour passes, then 2, and your quiver tip or float remains absolutely motionless, or even worse, you're only getting bites from tiny nuisance fish when you were expecting a real monster. Sound familiar? What if I told you that at this very moment a massive fish is sitting just 5 yards away from your feed, staring at it and then swimming away in terror? That's right. You aren't feeding the fish, you're scaring them off. Today we're going to expose the biggest mistake that turns your ground bait into an underwater repellent. And it's not something you'll find written on the packets in your local tackle shop. Ready to find out the truth? To understand why this paradox happens, we need to think like a fish for a moment. Forget human logic where we assume more of a good thing is always better. A fish's senses are on a completely different level. Their sense of smell is thousands of times more acute than a dog's. Their lateral line picks up the tiniest vibrations in the water. And their vision? It works nothing like ours. In the angling world, we often talk about pressure and caution. Big fish, be it carp, bream or tench, only reach that size because they are naturally suspicious. They don't just charge at anything. Any unnatural change in their environment is an instant red flag. We like to think of ground bait as a banquet. But if that banquet smells like a chemistry lab or looks like a blatant trap, no self-respecting trophy fish is going anywhere near it. Let's break down exactly what we're doing wrong. Let's start with the most common mistake, the chemical overload. Too many anglers follow the more is better rule, tipping half a bottle of additive into their ground bait. To us, standing on the bank, it smells fantastic, strawberry, tutti frutti, or a punchy garlic. But let's look at it from under the surface. In the dense medium of water, scents behave very differently. The concentration at your spot quickly becomes unbearable. For a fish's incredibly sensitive receptors, it isn't an inviting aroma. It's a total sensory assault, like being hit in the face with pepper spray. The fish moves in, takes a hit to its senses, and bolts in a panic. This is even more critical in cold water, where scent dispersal is much slower. A prime example is overdoing the concentrated dips right in the feeder. You're essentially creating a dead zone around your hook that the fish simply cannot bring themselves to enter. The second mistake comes down to the simple science of oils and fats. You've likely heard that oils perform poorly in cold water, but why exactly does that put the fish off? Imagine you've added a heavy fish oil or hemp oil when the water temperature is below 10 degrees. The oil simply won't disperse. Instead, it congeals into thick droplets or a waxy film. When a fish, drawn in by an initial scent, arrives at your swim and starts to feed, these fatty particles begin to coat its gills and mouth. Instead of a meal, the fish experiences pure discomfort. It struggles to breathe, its sensory receptors are clogged with congealed fat, and its natural feeding response is completely disrupted. The fish senses that the food is wrong, too heavy and potentially harmful to its system. It will quickly leave the area to clear its gills, and it won't be coming back. The irony is, while this exact same mix might have smashed it in the summer, right now, it's acting as a total deterrent. The third point is ground bait color. We often overlook the contrast against the lake bed. Imagine at the dark, silty bottom, typical for most of our lakes and ponds, and then you drop 2 kilos of bright yellow ground bait right on top of it. You've just created a massive, glowing target. While small roach might be curious for a wary specimen bream or carp, that bright patch is a massive red flag. Against a light background, they're silhouetted and completely exposed to predators, like pike or zander. For a trophy fish, the instinct for self-preservation always outweighs hunger. To them, that bright spot is like a searchlight in a dark room. They'll prefer to stay in the shadows on the periphery where their natural camouflage still works. You can sit over that traffic light for hours, but the fish will just circle the edges without ever actually committing to the spot. The fourth issue is particle size. You know the old saying, the bigger the better? Well, in this case, it's exactly the opposite. If your ground bait consists of nothing but fine dust and crushed biscuit, you're just creating a massive cloud in the water. That cloud is a magnet for nuisance fish. Roach, bleak, and small skimmers will swarm the area in an instant. They create a total frenzy, constantly pestering your hook bait and never letting it settle. Big fish hate that kind of commotion. On top of that, there's simply nothing for them to eat. A large bream has to use up a lot of energy just to filter out tiny particles. If it only sees a cloud of dust, it knows the calories aren't worth the effort. It'll just move on in search of a proper meal, something like snails, bloodworm, or large grains. Fine ground bait is great for building a rhythm, but it's also the quickest way to filter out the specimens. Point 5 is spoiled bait. This is a classic pitfall on those longer sessions. You've prepped your particles, maybe some corn, hemp, or groats, and left the bucket sitting out in the sun. By the following afternoon, the mix has started to turn, and you get that unmistakable sour smell. A lot of anglers think, it's fine, the fish won't mind, fermentation is actually a good thing. But that is a massive myth. There's a huge difference between controlled fermentation and outright rotting. Spoiled bait completely messes with the pH levels of the water in your swim. It starts releasing carbon dioxide and toxins, making the water right over your baited area turn acidic. Fish are incredibly sensitive to these chemical shifts. They can pick up on them from dozens of yards away. To them, it's a clear warning that the food is rotten and dangerous. Without realizing it, you're turning a promising spot into a complete dead zone. If your bait has gone sour, be ruthless. Get rid of it. Chuck it in the bushes if you have to, but whatever you do, keep it out of the water. Mistake number 6, excessive ground bait activity, or the so-called geyser effect. Many manufacturers pack their mixes with buoyant additives like crushed hemp or coconut flakes to draw fish in from afar. But when there's too much movement, it creates a chaotic scene on the lake bed. Everything is fizzing, rising, and falling. Now, for active carp, this might work, but for a wary, specimen-sized bream or tench, this unnatural commotion is a red flag. Food shouldn't be jumping at them. An overactive mix doesn't create a stable carpet to feed. It creates a messy column of debris. Large bottom feeders prefer inert bait, something that sits still on the deck, waiting to be found. To a big fish, all that vertical lifting usually signals a swarm of small fry making a nuisance of themselves, rather than a solid, dependable meal. Point 7. Poor hydration. Underwetting your ground bait is a classic mistake for newcomers. The mix might feel damp enough to squeeze into a ball, but the moment it hits the water, it disintegrates, sometimes before it even reaches the bottom. What happens then? The current carries your feed far and wide. Instead of drawing fish into a concentrated area, you're essentially spreading them too thin. Rather than pinning the fish down to a tight 2-foot spot, they'll be roaming all over the swim chasing tiny crumbs. This kills the competition for food, making the fishing erratic and unpredictable. Big fish want to settle on a compact bed of bait. If your feed washes several meters downstream, the shoal will just follow it and vanish. Correctly hydrated bait must stay in the feeder until it hits the deck. Bait mechanics are your most powerful tool for controlling the fish. Mistake number 8 is all about scent. And I'm not talking about your ground bait, I'm talking about your hands. A fish's sense of smell is incredibly sharp, so take a look at your hands. Have you had a cigarette, applied any insect repellent, put on some sunblock? Or did you fill up with petrol on the way to the water? All these things, nicotine, chemicals, fuel, are massive red flags. The moment you load your feeder or hook your bait, you're transferring those particles directly into the water. To a fish, it's like an air raid siren going off. Insect repellent is the absolute worst. It contains chemicals that trigger an instant panic response in fish. If you've just sprayed for mozzies and then reached into your bait bucket, you might as well pack up and head home. You won't see a decent fish all day. Always give your hands a good scrub with water from the bank before you touch anything the fish are going to eat. Number 9 is what we call the satiety factor, basically overfeeding the fish. It's a common mistake to use high-protein mixes when the fish aren't particularly active. If you're dumping kilos of pellets, boilies, or heavy, oily ground bait into your swim when their metabolism is slow, like in early spring, late autumn, or during a sudden weather shift, the fish will fill up far too quickly. They only need a few mouthfuls to feel satisfied, and once they do, they go dormant. They might still be sitting right on your spot, but they simply won't bite. Your hook bait just gets lost in a mountain of high-calorie freebies. Remember, the goal of ground bait is to stimulate their appetite, not satisfy it. You want your feed to be fragrant and attractive, but low in nutritional value. That way, the fish will keep grazing and searching until they finally pick up your hook bait. Mistake number 10, forgetting about the flow when you're baiting up. It's simple geometry really, but it's amazing how many anglers overlook it. You've found your spot, clipped up, and you're launching those big feeders out. But if the river's moving and there's a bit of depth, that feeder is going to drift as it sinks. By the time it hits the bottom, your ground bait has washed out and landed several meters downstream from where you actually measured your distance. The result? You're fishing in one spot, but your bait pile is somewhere else entirely. The fish are tucked in on the feed, while your hook bait is sitting in a desert further upstream. Big fish rarely move above the bait trail. They're either right on it or just behind it. You might think the fish aren't interested, but the truth is, you've simply missed the target. You've always got to account for that drift to make sure your hook bait lands right in the middle of the dinner table. Point 11. Failing to include animal protein when it's absolutely essential. We often fall into the trap of relying solely on cereal-based mixes or breadcrumbs, but for bream, carp, and especially tench, animal protein is a massive part of their natural diet. We're talking bloodworm, maggots, and chopped worm. If you're fishing a venue that's rich in natural food like bloodworm, and you only offer the fish sweet, biscuit-style ground bait, they might not even recognize it as a meal. Think of it like this. If you're expecting a steak and someone hands you a dry biscuit, it might smell nice, but it's just not going to satisfy you. Adding a bit of soup, chopped up maggots or worms to your mix sends out a powerful signal that high-protein food is available. It drives the big fish wild. Often, the lack of this meat is exactly why you're only catching small fry while the quality fish ignore your swim, choosing instead to root through the silt nearby for the real thing. Mistake number 12 is all about salt and sugar, specifically getting the balance wrong. We often forget that these are natural flavor enhancers and preservatives. In the wild, fish are constantly hunting for minerals because freshwater is naturally quite low in salt. Adding a bit of salt to your ground bait in the spring or when the water is cold can act like a total magnet. But don't overdo it, or you'll get the opposite result. A mix that's too salty causes tissue dehydration, which makes the fish feel pretty uncomfortable. It's a similar story with sugar and molasses in the summer. If it's too sweet, it can actually be off-putting, but the biggest issue is that sugar kicks off fermentation. If you mix up a sweet ground bait in the morning and fish through a hot day, by lunchtime, that sugar will have started turning into alcohol and vinegar. Moderation and seasonal awareness are the keys to success. Go for salt and spices in the spring and sugars and fruit in the summer. Just keep it sensible. Number 13. Feeding noise. Most carp anglers are well aware of spomming, baiting up with a rocket. While it's highly effective, it's also incredibly loud. If you're fishing in shallow water, let's say under 6 feet, a heavy feeder or a ball of ground bait hitting the surface is like throwing a brick into the lake. Big fish are naturally wary of heavy impacts. If you're bombing your spot every couple of minutes, you're likely just driving the better fish away. They'll back off to a safe distance and wait for the commotion to stop. Often, it's far better to bait up heavily in one go and then keep things quiet for an hour or two, only topping up with small amounts, rather than constantly crashing heavy gear into the water. Stealth is a key part of your baiting strategy, especially on wild or heavily pressured venues. Mistake number 14. Using tap water to mix your ground bait. It might seem like a minor detail, but it's a big one. To save time on the bank, many anglers prepare their mix at home using water straight from the tap. The problem? Chlorine. It's a powerful disinfectant designed to kill off bacteria, and to a fish, the scent of chlorine is a massive red flag. It will completely overpower your additives, whether you're using vanilla, strawberry, or any other attractor. Even if you let the water sit for a while, that faint chemical trace remains. By using it, you're introducing a harsh, alien substance into the environment. Remember, always, and I mean always, use water from the venue you're actually fishing. It has the local microflora, the correct pH level, and none of those off-putting chemicals. Point 15. Mismatching your feed and your hook bait. Imagine you're putting out a bed of pure fish meal pellets, but then you put sweet corn on the hook. There's a total disconnect there. Or maybe you're feeding a sweet biscuit ground bait, but you're fishing with a bunch of worms. Now, occasionally, contrast can work, but more often than not, big fish are looking for exactly what they're smelling in the swim. If you've laid down a carpet of hemp and corn, then corn, or at least something mimicking it, should be on your hook. Remember, fish hoover up bait like a vacuum cleaner. If your hook bait tastes or smells radically different from everything else, they might just spit it out as a reflex, treating it like a foreign object. The golden rule is feed what you fish with. It's a fundamental principle that's often forgotten when people start overcomplicating their experiments. Mistake 16 is the vacuum effect and species competition. Sometimes your ground bait is so fine and attractive that it draws in a massive shoal of aggressive small skimmers or silver bream. We're talking hundreds of them darting around like mad and hoovering up everything in seconds. Big bream are different. They're steady, slow-moving fish. When a specimen moves in and sees this frantic swarm of youngsters buzzing about, just won't bother getting involved in the scrap. It feels out of place in all that chaos. Your job is to filter out the small stuff. How? You need to coarsen your mix. Get rid of the fine dust and make the feed stickier and heavier. You want it to sit hard on the bottom, only accessible to a fish with a mouth big enough to swallow those larger particles. If you don't use the mechanics of your feed to push out the small fish, the big ones will never even get a look in. Point 17. The lack of feeding competition. This is the flip side of the coin. If you put out too much bait and spread it thin over a massive area, the fish don't feel the need to compete. They'll just wander about, picking up a morsel here and there. They're in no rush, they're calm, well-fed, and the fishing will be sluggish. The perfect situation is having just enough bait on the bottom to create a real buzz. Lots of fish, but limited food. That's when the survival instinct kicks in. Grab it before someone else does. At that point, they lose their caution and hit your hook bait hard. The real art of baiting is finding that sweet spot, drawing them in without overfeeding them, creating a sense of scarcity in a sea of attraction. Mistake number 18 is falling for the trap of seasonal color stereotypes. Conventional wisdom says you should use dark ground baits in the spring and lighter ones in the summer, but that's a massive oversimplification. It all comes down to water clarity. During the summer, algae blooms can turn the water a murky green, leaving zero visibility on the lake bed. In conditions like that, color stops being a visual trigger altogether. Instead, scent and vibration take center stage. Then as we head into autumn, the water clears up, meaning even a dark mix can stand out at depth. The real mistake is blindly following textbook rules instead of reacting to the actual conditions on the day. For example, a red ground bait will often outfish a black one in the spring simply because it mimics a cluster of bloodworm. Don't get bogged down in dogma, experiment, and let the fish tell you what they want. Number 19. Ignoring thermoclines. This is really about the physics of the water, but your bait plays a huge role here. During the summer, you often get water stratification, warm water on the surface, but a cold, oxygen-deprived layer at the bottom. If you're baiting up the bottom of a deep hole where a thermocline has cut off the oxygen, the fish simply won't go down there. It doesn't matter how high quality your ground bait is, they'll be holding mid-water, just above that cold layer. In these situations, bottom bait is useless. It'll actually just sit there and rot because there's no oxygen for the bacteria to break it down. The mistake is feeding the deck when the fish are much higher up. What you need instead is a light, slow-sinking mix, classic zig-rig territory. Or you should look for shallower spots where the water is better oxygenated. And finally, mistake number 20, believing in a magic pill. Plenty of anglers think, if I just buy the most expensive bag from a big-name brand, the fish will practically jump into the keep net. But that's just shifting the responsibility onto the manufacturer. The truth is, ground bait is nothing more than a tool. It's like a hammer. You can use a hammer to build a house, or you can use it to smash your thumb. Even the priciest mix on the market, if it's mixed poorly or cast in the wrong place, will be outperformed by basic breadcrumbs in the hands of someone who actually understands the water. The biggest mistake of all is switching off your brain. You need to read the lake bed, watch the weather, and gauge how the fish are feeding. Tailor the consistency of your mix to the situation. Your bait should be solving a specific problem right then and there, not just serving as some expensive ritual sacrifice to the lake. Fishing isn't a game of luck, it's a tactical battle with nature. By now, you'll realize that your ground bait is a sophisticated tool for controlling fish behavior. Whether it's the aroma, the color, the way it breaks down, or its nutritional value, every single element can either lure in the fish of a lifetime or spook it for good. The main takeaway from today's video is simple. Stop baiting up blindly. Every time you're on the bank, start by asking yourself, who exactly am I catering for, and how does this look through the eyes of a fish? Avoid overdoing the additives, keep your bait fresh, and always be mindful of what's on your hands. Apply these tips, and you'll see quiet swims suddenly come to life as the small stuff makes way for those proper rod-bending takes from big bream and carp. Thanks for watching. If you've made any of these mistakes yourself, let me know in the comments and tell me, what's the weirdest thing you've ever added to your mix? Subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and I'll see you at the water's edge. Tight lines.